There is a big difference between the best defense to play for the rest of the season and the best defense to play for the playoffs. And the best example of this is the Los Angeles Chargers defense. When you look at their defensive schedule for the next several weeks, they've got teams like Baltimore, Atlanta, and Kansas City. Those are not good plays, and you will not see the Chargers on this list today. However, you did see them in my fantasy playoff ranking schedule because they take on teams like Tampa Bay, Denver, and New England. So their playoff schedule is much easier than the rest of season schedule. So before we go into the rest of season rankings for defenses in fantasy football, just make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm the only fantasy YouTuber who covers defense multiple times a week. So getting into our first tier right here, we've got the Lions defense at number 1. Obviously, this defense has been, they have been a wrecking ball to offenses. They are blowing teams out of the water. They're on kind of a different level right now than every other team that they're playing against. The Lions defense is ironic. Like, ever since Aiden Hutchinson went down, they're getting after the quarterback more efficiently, and they're making more plays through turnovers. So their defense has been absolutely fantastic. But looking at their schedule right here, there are several. I think all three of these are going to be good weeks for the Lions defense, and I'll explain the last one particularly. At Indianapolis is week 15. So start out your playoffs with an offense that is so high in turnover ratio this year. They've been turning the ball over a ton offensively. Anthony Richardson is still very turnover prone. Then you get the Chicago Bears, who just don't score many points. That's not an exactly turnover-friendly offense, but they don't score a lot of points either. And I think the way the Lions are playing right now, they're going to get after Caleb and get some turnovers as well. And then versus Green Bay. Now, Green Bay is obviously the tough one right here because Green Bay's offense can put up points, and I expect them to in this game because they played an egg the first time. But with the Lions defense here, they're going up against an offense that is turnover prone. Every single week, you can count on a Jordan Love interception. And I really like Jordan Love, but he throws an interception at least once a week. So I think with the Lions defense here, just the way that they've been playing, the momentum that they have, and with their last 3 remaining matches before the fantasy playoffs, I think they're a great defense to play moving forward. The Texans defense is at number 2, and I feel very similarly to them. I think their defense has been on a heater lately. The offense has been the problem over in Houston. The offensive line's the problem. CJ Stroud doesn't look his best. The defense is not the issue. And the miraculous part about this one is the Texans have been unhealthy. Like, Will Anderson has been out of the lineup. You've got Azeez Al-Shaair, who's been in and out of the lineup. They've had several guys throughout the front 7 and the secondary that have been missing games and back in lineups, back and forth over the last several months. It's been like that for the Texans all year, but they have been great at getting after the quarterback and making big plays happen through interceptions and turnovers. So with the Texans defense, when I see that they're playing the Tennessee Titans and the Jacksonville Jaguars in the next 2 weeks, that's enough to put them at number 2, even though they have a bye week. They have a bye week in week 14, so that makes them ready for the fantasy playoffs. Not as big on them in the playoffs because that schedule is definitely harder. But this rest of season schedule, the last 2 games before playoff time, this is a must-play defense. On a weekly basis, they were number 2 in my rankings this week. They will be similar next week when we rank week 13 defenses. The Texans defense, you want them in fantasy football for the rest of the year. And then the Broncos defense are in the same exact boat here. Their defense is in the fantasy playoff rankings if you go back and watch that video. And that's because they've been playing so great all year. The Broncos defense has done absolutely fantastic because their defense gets after the quarterback on a weekly basis. Doesn't matter who they're playing. They're making things happen when they get back there in the backfield. Now, they're not a super turnover-friendly defense, but I don't think it matters when you're taking on the Las Vegas Raiders, who automatically turn the ball over at least twice a game. And same with the Browns. The Browns do the same thing. And that's their 2 next games before their week 14 bye week. So with the Broncos, they're in the same exact boat as the Texans. The reason I prefer the Texans over the Broncos is because the Texans are capable of getting more big plays. The Broncos haven't exactly done that. They've been more of a stable defense that's going to get you between 10 and 15 fantasy points. The Texans defense can get you 20. That's why I prefer the Texans defense slightly over the Denver Broncos, but they're both fantastic defenses belonging inside of the first tier. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got the Vikings defense at number 4. And obviously, this is the number 1 defense in fantasy. They have largely been awesome. If you actually look at their game log, though, there is one thing to note here, is that the Minnesota Vikings, they started out the year so hot. Like, they were red hot defensively. And then ever since the bye week, they've kind of trickled off, but they're they've settled at basically 10 to 12 to 13 fantasy points. Still a very, very good fantasy defense on a weekly basis because they get after your quarterback and they make big plays happen. They're super aggressive at the point of attack, and they have Brian Flores as a defensive coordinator. When you have that guy, your defense is going to be really good. Now with the Vikings defense here, they've got a really obvious good matchup against Chicago this week, and that's a fantastic matchup. They were in the top 5 of my rankings this week. I think the Vikings have a good game. Then you get Arizona, which is not exactly been the best matchup. I still don't know how I feel about the Cardinals offense, to be honest with you. I still think they're hot and cold. I still think they're prone to bad games. So maybe they take on a tough defense like the Vikings. I'd be willing to play the Vikings for sure. We'll just have to see how high I rank them that week in fantasy football. And then the Falcons. That's the biggest wild card to end off the regular season. The Falcons offense. Are they going to be good that day, or are they going to be a disaster? Because this team has been really hot and cold. Either way, I would just say this. The Vikings defense can be played each and every week over the next 3 weeks. Definitely this week, definitely next week, and definitely in week 14. So the Vikings defense, they don't have the greatest schedule, I guess, but just the way their defense is played consistently and the way their schedule's lining up, they've got beatable matchups, and I trust their defense. Number 5, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. And I think that the Bucs defense needs to be, their alarm bells need to be sounded. This one takes stones to play. Now, it takes stones to play a top 5 defense because I have them at number 5 because of matchup and matchup alone. The Bucs defense is taking on the Giants this week at home versus Tommy Cutlets. Excellent matchup. Then they get at Carolina the following week as well. Another great matchup. And then they end off with the Las Vegas Raiders. Their defense over the next 3 weeks should theoretically be very playable. But I want to get into the numbers here with the Bucs. With the Buccaneers defense, they're not a team that's been exactly consistent getting after the quarterback. And they also are very prone to giving up big games. But here's the reason I ultimately like the Bucs. I think this is a very nuanced take right here because when you look at the Bucs, they give up tons of points. They don't consistently get after the quarterback. What do all 3 of these offenses have in common? They're not usually scoring over 20 points in a particular week. Their offenses are very low potency, and they don't put up tons of points. The Bucs have played plenty of offenses that have been good. Their schedule significantly lightens up on them coming out of the bye week. The other thing is, all 3 of these teams turn the ball over. More particularly the Giants and Las Vegas Raiders, but the Panthers still do turn the ball over as well. So in my opinion, I think that we're going to see some more bigger plays and just lower scoring because they're not taking on potent offenses here. And the one other thing I will say is the Bucs defense actually have had a couple good games this year. They're capable of making big plays happen because Todd Bowles is still a defensive coach. So it's definitely important to keep these things in mind if you're considering going with the Bucs because their schedule is so strong, and I do believe that they are capable of hitting some big games. Would not surprise me to see them go on a 3-game run where they're super good in fantasy. The Commanders defense, also in a very similar boat here, and I just think that with the Commanders defense, it's also worth noting that a lot of it has to do with matchups. They get Dallas this weekend, which is absolutely fantastic. And then they get the Tennessee Titans, and they're both games that are at home in Washington. Then they get the bye week. So obviously, they're not in the same tier as the Texans and the Broncos, who have a week 14 bye week as well. And their matchups are just as good. Dallas and Tennessee. The reason why is because the Commanders, I just do not trust them nearly as much as I trust the Texans and the Broncos defense. Their defense has been very inconsistent, but again, capable of making big plays happen. Their defense has been less doing that than even the Bucs defense, but just with the Dallas Cowboys, Cooper Rush and its Cowboys offense, they have turned the ball over 7 times in 2 games. It is insanity. And it should have been 10 because the Texans defense dropped 3 interceptions on Monday night versus the Cowboys. This Cowboys offense is a total disaster. They're going to crush them. And then the Titans, they give gifts because they have Will Levis, who's Santa Claus. So I just think, again, you look at matchups here and you look at potential with the Commanders defense led by a defensive head coach, Dan Quinn. I'm taking the shot on them in a lot of situations. The Chiefs defense at number 7 to round this year out. Again, same exact boat here because the Chiefs defense are in a situation where I've said it all year long, very consistently. This is a fantastic real life defense. but not a good fantasy defense. Both are possible because the Chiefs don't give up tons of points, and they also put their defenses in so many positions to where they screw up quarterback rhythm because of blitzing. That doesn't matter for fantasy football. What matters is if we get sacks, if we get takeaways, and they haven't done that very much. That's been their problem. And they actually have really strong matchups coming up. The Carolina Panthers this weekend, the Las Vegas Raiders, and then the Los Angeles Chargers. This Carolina matchup, I've got them ranked inside my top 6, but that's not because I feel super good about them. It's because I know their defense is good, but I also like the matchup. I don't trust them to get tons of turnovers because that's not what their defense has been. But then they get the Raiders here, turnover prone, but it's a divisional game, and the Raiders take that game very seriously. So I do think that there's opportunities here. And then the Chargers, obviously, that's a wide range of outcomes right there. Divisional game could be tight, also could be a shootout. So I think that it's important to note here with the Chiefs. I'm not going to keep saying this over and over. This should be the last time I have to say it. They're a great real-life defense, not a good fantasy defense. But they're here because matchups are strong, particularly in the next 2 weeks. And I would say Matt Stafford's projection on Underdog this week is strong to very strong. It's at 0.5 total yards on Underdog. That's what they're giving new customers. So you hit the higher on this one, you're basically winning free money. And if you want to take advantage of it this week, go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, and use code FFN to sign up for Underdog. They'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you hit the higher on the sweat free pick for Matt Stafford this week. Now, jumping out to our next tier right here, we've got the 49ers at number 8 here. And obviously, the 49ers have done really well for the majority of the year in fantasy football. Their defense is physical, they take the ball over, and they get sacked. That's what we need in fantasy football. Their schedule significantly tightens over these next several weeks. And really, it's been kind of tight over the last couple weeks as well. But their defense over the next several weeks, they've got tough offense to play, but I think there is opportunities here. The Green Bay Packers is their first weekend, this weekend's matchup. They were inside my top 12 this week. Why is that? Because the Packers turn the ball over. So even if the Packers put up 27 to 30 points, if they walk away with 2 or 3 turnovers, they'll still be doing us some favors in fantasy football. Won't be their best week, but they'll still be playable. The Buffalo Bills, that's a tough matchup. No way around that. Buffalo does not turn the ball over this year. Allen has had a really clean year. He's an MVP candidate for sure. So I don't think that's a good matchup. There's no way around that. The Chicago Bears, that's a great matchup. So you've got one great matchup at week 14. Then you've got the Green Bay Packers, who potentially is a playable matchup right here. And I just think with the 49ers defense, this is a strong defense that just has a tougher schedule. And that's really what this tier is about. When you look at the Rams defense at number 9, they have a similar boat. Their defense has just gotten better and better and better over the weeks. The one bad game they've had in between like the last month and a half is actually what they did against the Miami Dolphins not too long ago. So I don't think that the Rams defense should be taken, too seriously, but I don't think you should also be too down on them just because of the Dolphins game. Again, when you look at the schedule here, they've got really one great matchup here. Versus Philadelphia is not a good one, obviously. The Eagles are definitely potent offensively. The one thing, again, potentially some turnovers here. That's the one thing that maybe you could get out of them, but the Eagles have been playing pretty clean lately. I wouldn't say that you can count on it. Then they have the New Orleans Saints. That's a great matchup. Sacks galore, should be turnovers, and not many points allowed. The Rams defense is a fantastic play alone in week 13. Then you get the Buffalo Bills again. Not a good matchup here. So with the Rams defense, proceed with caution on this one because they have not been consistently great like the 49ers. But they do have one particularly great one. And then this week, some situations possibly playable, but I'd probably stay away from them this week as well. And then the Eagles defense to round out this year. Speaking of them, the Eagles defense has been really good over the last month. Their defense has significantly grown under Vic Fangio. Their young players on the back end, they're coming through for them. Now again, the way they've been playing lately, I wish I could rank them higher than this. But look at their schedule. The Los Angeles Rams, potent offense. Potential turnovers, but a very potent offense. The Baltimore Ravens, who Lamar Jackson is he has 2 or 3 losses against the NFC all time. So I don't think that's a great matchup. And then you have Carolina. The great matchup right here, which keeps them inside the top 10 because they've been a stout defense in fantasy football. Again, if you want to find the potential that you could play the Eagles, it's this week. The Los Angeles Rams, you could potentially play them because Los Angeles does turn the ball over sometimes. You can't play them in week 13, and you can absolutely play them in week 14. So one good matchup, great defense, much like the rest of the defenses in this tier. Now dropping down to our last two. Last tier, I've got the Cardinals and the Seahawks. Now with these two defenses right here, we'll split up the Cardinals really quick. These two teams play each other twice over the next 3 weeks. So they get Seattle, Minnesota, then Seattle again. 2 of those on the road, 1 of those at home. So obviously with Seattle, they've been definitely capable of turning the ball over tons this year. I view this as a potentially good matchup, at least one of the 2 weeks, because maybe the Cardinals don't do well this week, but maybe in week 14, they have them figured out and they get several turnovers out of that. Minnesota, I actually view as a potentially beatable offense, because their offense is definitely showing cracks. They're not scoring as many points with Sam Darnold anymore, and Darnold does throw interceptions. So this one, I actually think could be a really underrated matchup. And then Seattle again. Like I said, if you take on them twice, maybe one time's good, maybe one time's not. The Cardinals defense has definitely improved in fantasy over the last month. So I think that this is a very solid play over the next couple weeks as well. And then the Seahawks defense. They have been so hot and cold this year in fantasy, it's hard to nail them down. They have a really good defense that's physical and aggressive, but sometimes they lay eggs, man. That defense is too inconsistent for me. They get the Cardinals, the Jets, and then the Cardinals again. So again, maybe one of those Cardinals matchups is a good one. I don't know. I honestly can't tell you if that's going to be a good one. The Cardinals are hot and cold offensively too. So I would lean maybe they can figure them out one of the 2 weeks. And then the Jets are a great matchup here. So with the Seahawks, they haven't been as good as the Cardinals have season long. That's why I prefer the Cardinals over the Seahawks here at 11-12. So let me know what your record is heading into this week. And if you want to see the top 12 defense for fantasy football playoffs right now, click on this video right here.